Christmas Day, 800 AD Rome, Old St. Peter's Basilica. On a day meant to celebrate the birth of the Saviour, the fate of Europe was completely altered in one breathtaking moment. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, was kneeling in prayer before the altar. Suddenly, Pope Leo III, a man who, just months prior, was battered and teetering on the edge of death, stepped behind the giant. Charlemagne later claimed he was taken completely by surprise. He said that had he known what the Pope was about to do, he would never have set foot in the church that day. This is a story that has been passed down for 1,200 years. It marks the birth of the father of Europe, the dawn of the Holy Roman Empire, and the starting point of the revival of Western civilization. Was that Christmas coronation truly a meticulously planned revival? Or was it merely a flawed political gamble directed by a desperate pope and a highly ambitious warlord? Textbooks tell us Charlemagne rebuilt Rome, but primary sources and archaeological evidence whisper a completely different version, a chaotic, accidental, and even somewhat shabby truth of an empire. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lindsay Winden channel. Today we will set out from the thermal springs of Aachen, traverse the snow Alps, and step back into the year 800 AD, an era steeped in intrigue and myth. We will deconstruct one of the greatest lies in the history of Western civilization, the dark history of Charlemagne, the father of Europe. After that Christmas in 800 AD, Charlemagne did not stay in Rome, nor did he attempt to establish his residence in the Eternal City. Instead, he returned to the north. He returned to Aachen. Why Aachen, historians will tell you it had strategic importance. But the real reason might be much more grounded. Charlemagne was overweight, suffered from severe gout, and Aachen possessed the best sulfur hot springs in all of Europe. In these steaming pools, Charlemagne was not just treating his joints. He was brewing a mad plan to conjure a new Rome out of thin air on these Frankish hunting grounds. This is the Aachen Cathedral, Charlemagne's center of power. If you think it looks familiar, that is because it is indeed a copy. Charlemagne ordered marble columns to be dismantled from Ravenna and Rome and transported thousands of miles to the north. This was not merely the transportation of building materials, but a theft of power. He wanted to tell the world that the soul of Rome now resided in the forests of the Franks. This is the famous throne of Charlemagne. Look closely. It lacks any ostentatious decoration. Why? Because these marble slabs were brought from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The signal Charlemagne wanted to convey was crystal clear. He was not a secular upstart. He was God's representative on earth, and his power was directly connected to Jesus Christ. But here lies the irony. When you step out of this magnificent stone church, you will find that this so-called New Rome actually consisted of only a few stone houses. The rest was entirely wood and thatch. At that time, the city of Rome had a population of tens of thousands, and Constantinople had hundreds of thousands. Yet in Aachen, apart from Charlemagne's itinerant court, it was virtually a wilderness. The majority of this Roman emperor's subjects had never even seen a carved stone in their entire lives. The so-called imperial revival in the Aachen of 800 AD was more like the visual illusion of a lonely genius than an actual social reality. Before we discuss that sacred Christmas, we must first talk about the man holding the crown. Pope Leo III in official church history, he is a suffering saint. But in the eyes of the Roman nobility at the time, he was a political opportunist of humble origins, corrupt, and even deeply embroiled in adultery scandals. This was not just an assassination attempt, it was a public humiliation. A mob attempted to gouge out his eyes and cut out his tongue. Why? Because under the laws of the time, a mutilated man could not serve as Pope. Leo III's political enemies wanted to silence him in the cruelest way possible. This representative of God on earth was now running like a stray dog. He crossed the Alps and arrived at Paderborn, the frontline military camp where Charlemagne was conquering the Saxons. This was one of the most important negotiations in world history. What did Leo III need? He needed Charlemagne's army to return to Rome, help clear his name, and secure his papal throne. What did Charlemagne need? He had conquered half of Europe, but he was still merely a Frankish king. Legally speaking, he was just a barbarian vassal of the Byzantine Empire, the true Roman Empire. He needed a legitimate sacred title that would allow him to stand as an equal with the emperor in the East. This is the truth of that dark deal. Charlemagne endorsed the Pope with military force, while the Pope whitewashed Charlemagne's ambitions in the name of God. Imagine this scene: a Frankish warlord sitting in a Roman court, judging the Roman elite, just to declare the Pope innocent. Just 2 days before the coronation, Leo III took a public oath, claiming he was innocent of all charges. No one believed him, but under the edge of Charlemagne's sword, no one dared to contradict him. So, when you look at that sacred moment of coronation, remember that it was not a miracle. It was the final signing ceremony of a contract. When we talk about the Roman Empire in 800 AD, we must remember an awkward fact: the true Roman Empire never disappeared. It merely moved to Constantinople, which we now call Byzantium. There, emperors wore purple silk, read Greek legal codes, and mocked the Frankish warlords in the West, who couldn't even spell their own names, as barbarians. But in 800 AD, something happened in Constantinople that left the entire Christian world dumbfounded. Irene, the ambitious empress, in order to seize power, ordered the eyes of her own biological son, Emperor Constantine this, to be gouged out. In the eyes of Westerners, this was not only an ethical tragedy but a legal loophole. According to the logic of the Franks and the Roman Church, a woman could not rule the empire. Since it was a woman sitting on the throne, the seat of the Roman emperor was, in a legal sense, vacant. This was the perfect opportunity that Pope Leo III and Charlemagne seized. They exploited this political vacuum of gender, claiming that Charlemagne was not usurping the throne but filling a vacancy. But here lies a diplomatic lie that has circulated for a millennium. Charlemagne's biographer, Einhard, wrote that Charlemagne was deeply disgusted by the coronation, saying that if he had known what the Pope was going to do, he would never have entered the church that day. Let's dismantle this statement from a critical perspective. Charlemagne was a ruler with an extreme desire for control. He spent his life precisely calculating every military and political move. Do you really believe that in a church filled with his cronies and soldiers, the Pope could sneakily plop a heavy crown on his head without him knowing? This performance of ignorance was actually top-tier political public relations. If Charlemagne appeared to proactively seize the crown, it would be a direct declaration of war against Byzantium. But if he was forced to accept it, he could say to the Eastern Empress in diplomatic correspondence, "Oh well, it was the Pope's idea. I had no choice." This not only gave him sacred legitimacy, but also left room to maneuver in international diplomacy. Therefore, the so-called revival of Rome was actually built upon a cruel court conspiracy and a hypocritical diplomatic performance. Charlemagne was not the heir to Rome. He was merely a high-end tenant who capitalized on his neighbor's chaos to move up. In history textbooks, Charlemagne's empire looks like a solid entity, stretching all the way from the Elbe River to the Atlantic Ocean. But if you traveled back to 800 AD, you would find that this empire was actually a massive illusion. Europe at that time had no paved roads, no postal system, not even a fixed capital. Although Aachen was magnificent, Charlemagne spent most of the year away from it. Charlemagne was not ruling the empire, he was eating it. Because the logistics system of the time simply could transport grain to Aachen. Therefore, the emperor had to tour the country with his massive court. Wherever they went, the local lords had to provide food. They would devour an estate like a swarm of locusts and then set off for the next one. To manage this loose alliance, Charlemagne invented a special system, the itinerant judges missi dominici. He typically sent out a count and a bishop, working in pairs, to act as the emperor's eyes and ears. They went to check if local officials were corrupt and to ensure that laws were being enforced. But that was precisely the problem. In an era where 99% of the population was illiterate, the law only existed on those few expensive pieces of parchment. To the ordinary Frankish peasant, the so-called Roman emperor was just a tax collector far away over the horizon, who took half of their harvest every year. We often hear about the Carolingian Renaissance, saying that Charlemagne loved education. But let's remain critical. Charlemagne promoted education not to make peasants literate, but to unify the church. He found that priests in different regions read different versions of the Bible and even mispronounced the words for baptism. If even the word of God could be unified, how could he unify this empire? What he needed was a standardized operating manual. Literacy was a technical tool for him to maintain his rule in that chaotic era, not a means to enlighten the masses. While Charlemagne was discussing Latin grammar in Aachen, his subjects were struggling just to survive the next winter. This empire had no taxation system, only the spoils of war. Once Charlemagne stopped expanding and had no new land or gold to distribute to his generals, this so-called empire would quickly collapse like a building made of sand. In 814 AD, Charlemagne died in Aachen. The very moment he died, the Roman Empire he had built with his own hands began its irreversible collapse. This is the greatest irony of history. Charlemagne spent his life pursuing unity, but less than 30 years after his death, his grandsons began slaughtering each other over territory. That so-called sacred empire, having lost Charlemagne's personal might and charisma, rapidly degenerated into countless small territories, warring against one another. No. Given that this empire was so short-lived, why do we still call him the father of Europe today? Because Charlemagne is no longer a real historical figure. He has become a political blind box, a vessel for projection. Napoleon called himself Charlemagne's heir to find legitimacy for his conquests. Germany used him to try and prove the innate superiority of the Germanic race. And the post-we European community chose him as a symbol to seek a common cultural root under the shadow of the Cold War. The Charlemagne we see today is actually the result of repainting by each generation of politicians according to their own needs. They filtered out the adultery scandals of Leo III, the tragedy of Empress Irene, and the famines on the muddy streets of Aachen. They left behind only a golden phantom, a unified, sacred, and civilized origin of Europe. Let us return to our initial question. Was that Christmas Day in 800 AD truly a revival? No, it was a political speculation jointly pulled off by a desperate pope and ambitious warlord. It did not revive Rome. It merely created a dream about Rome and left Europe wandering within this dream for 1,000 years. Charlemagne's empire may have long turned to dust, but that illusion of unity and sanctity continues to shape our world to this day. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.